Good evening, and welcome to the 4th Annual Gates Forum Keynote Conversation. I'm Mike Tierney. I'm the director of William & Mary's Global Research Institute. GRI convenes scholars, students, and external partners to address pressing global problems. We incubate and support multidisciplinary projects that can have an impact at the university and beyond. Nowhere is this approach better realized than in our partnership with the Gates Global Policy Center and our work here with the Gates Forum. The idea behind the Gates Forums is clear: to produce original research and action plans that senior policymakers can use to redevelop U.S. foreign policy toolkit for the 21st century. Over the past 4 years, we've partnered with the Gates Global Policy Center to tackle key issues in U.S. foreign policy and national security. How does this happen at a place like William & Mary? It's a long story involving leadership from President Reevely, President Rowe, and Chancellor Gates. But a key player in this effort has been my partner in crime at the GGPC, General Pete Corelli. In addition to being a retired 4-star general, Pete had spent almost a decade working to prevent and then treat traumatic brain injuries for U.S. service members. He'd been working with research scientists across the country at a number of different research universities. So when he walked into my office in early 2020 and he explained the task before us, I knew that William & Mary had a great partner who understood the complexities of research universities and the distinct challenges of working with faculty researchers. Pete's been the best partner I could imagine. General Corelli, could you share a few words?
Well, thank you, Mike. When I walked into the office coming from Seattle, Washington, 1 week before they declared a pandemic, no one wanted to shake my hand. I will never quite forget that. This year's Gates Forum will address U.S. security assistance. Previous Gates Forums have addressed strategic communications, developmental aid, and economic diplomacy last year, focusing on sanctions policy. Next year, we hope to take a hard look at alliances and international organization. Secretary Gates's most recent book, or as he's called here at William & Mary, Chancellor Gates, was an in-depth look at the non-kinetic elements of national power, entitled The Exercise of Power. These are the elements of power, not the use of ships or tanks or airplanes, that allowed the United States to win the Cold War without firing a shot. The success of the Gates Forum and the Gates Global Policy Center is made possible by the vision and support of President Rowe, our partnership with William & Mary, and the Global Research Institute, a partnership like no other. Now, I'm about to show you photographs, all that were taken by Howard K. Buffett in one of his 23 trips to Ukraine. I was on his 20th trip, during which I learned of the Foundation's work in Ukraine, supporting demining operations, supporting the National Police, and the building of what I consider one of the most amazing facilities I've ever seen, called Superhumans. Superhumans was built to care for all Ukrainians, military and civilians, who require war-related prosthetics and facial surgery. Superhumans is the most amazing medical facility I have ever seen. You will see images of all of these innovative approaches to security assistance in the short presentation we will run now. Please run the film.
Thanks, Pete. That's powerful, sort of sets the tone. I have one quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. After the moderated conversation up here, if you'd like to ask a question, there'll be people coming around with microphones. And so if you can just state your question clearly, the moderator will identify you and you can ask your question. If you're sitting up in the upper section and you need to leave, please go out the back. And if you're sitting down here, please go out that way. Okay? I'm now pleased to introduce William & Mary's president, Catherine Rowe, who will introduce our guests. Without President Rowe's support for the Gates Forums, we would not be here today. So thank you, boss. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tierney and General Corelli. That was a tough slideshow to watch, and it is a powerful reminder of why so many of us are here, which is to prevent wars and then to remediate their depredations so that we are proud at William & Mary to bring our prowess in teaching and learning and research. Those are the powers that we activate with passion to support the Gates Global Policy Center and to support this work in a larger sense. So I want to recognize, I can't see anyone in the room very easily, but I do know that we have members of the Board of Visitors here. We have President Emeritus Taylor Reevely, I think. There you are, sir. Students, faculty, staff, and neighbors, and alumni who are here today. It's really wonderful to see the room so full. At least I can see shadows, so I know that's why you're full. Thank you for being here with us and for joining in this conversation. This is a really important moment to be thinking about how we advance global collaboration, how we see an end, to the extent possible, to war. It's the turn of the U.S. quarter millennium. We're about to head into 2026. We are an institution that has been here since before the country's founding and has advanced knowledge in service of our nation and its leaders and others around the world. Today, we are a trusted R1 institution, newly. If you haven't heard since last year, that means the top research level in the country of universities. That's really important because for us, our expertise in geopolitics, in economic flourishing, in global security, in conservation, all of that expertise is mounted towards impact in the world. We are really, really interested in the most pressing research questions that are in the field coming to us so that we can bring our research to bear on them. And much of that research is done with undergraduates. Over the last quarter century, the Global Research Institute has generated more than $100 million in external funding in service of high impact research. Really impressive. Thousands of undergraduate students have joined in that work. Graduate students, faculty, neighbors, partners around the country and beyond. The alma mater of the nation, I want you to know, is the place to come if you want to be applying data and analyzing it in a robust and well-informed way to global policy questions. And then use what is learned from that data, from that analysis to improve our world. This is the place to be. So, well done for being here right now. In that spirit, we're going to look forward to a wonderful conversation today, very robust. Please join me in welcoming our participants. Our moderator, Thom Shanker. Come on in, everybody. Come in and take your seats. I'm just going to quickly introduce Thom. Thom Shanker is a philanthropist and, a moderator here. I'm going to say just a second, from the Project for Media and National Security. We also have philanthropist and Renaissance man, Howard Buffett. Please come in, Mr. Buffett. And William & Mary's 24th Chancellor, the Honorable Robert M. Gates. Please come in, sir. Mr. Shanker, as I said, directs the Project for Media and National Security, and prior to this appointment, he covered the Department of Defense, overseas combat operations and national security policy for the New York Times. We're thrilled to have you here. As a correspondent Mr. Shanker was embedded with U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. Most recently, he served as deputy Washington editor for the Times, managing coverage of the military, of diplomacy, and of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Buffett is a farmer, a photographer, a filmmaker, as you've just seen, a businessman, a sworn law enforcement officer, and a former elected official. He currently oversees one of the country's largest private charitable foundations. The foundation invests in global food security, in conflict mitigation. It combats human trafficking and ensures public safety. Mr. Buffett also has authored 15 books on conservation, wildlife, and the human condition. He served as the executive producer on 4 award-winning documentaries, including the Academy Award-nominated Porcelain War and Virunga. Did I say that right? Virunga? Is that correct?
Close.
Okay. Virunga? Okay, there we go. Finally, it's my immense privilege to welcome our third panelist back home to William & Mary, Chancellor Robert Gates. Chancellor Gates has served under 8 U.S. presidents. He is the only Secretary of Defense to have served under presidents from different political parties, something that we think is a powerful example of the kind of leadership we care about at William & Mary. We need that bipartisanship every year, every decade. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of his devotion to U.S. service members and commitment to the American people. I know there are many service members here. While we can't see you, thank you for your service, whether it was under his leadership or others. We need that commitment from our servicemen and to our servicemen and women today. He served as William & Mary's Chancellor since 2012, outstripping George Washington, the first American Chancellor, and we're so grateful for that commitment to the university. To put this just in perspective, President Washington was only Chancellor for 11 years. Just saying. Last month, the Board of Visitors unanimously appointed him to a 3rd term as Chancellor. So thank you, sir, for answering the alma mater's call again and agreeing to serve. Chancellor Gates, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Shanker, we're so pleased to have you join us today.
Thank you so very much for that warm introduction. As I was planning for our discussion this afternoon, I'm reminded that the 3 greatest influences on my life are my wife, Johnny Cash, and the United States Army. And relevant is that the Army, when assessing a gigantic topic, divides it into strategic, operational, and tactical, which I'll do with our discussion today with your permission. So, Mr. Secretary, at the strategic, overarching level, you have been in charge of CIA and Department of Defense, the 2 major hard power ministries in our government. Yet you wrote this very important book, Exercise of Power. I'm a professor at GW, not here, so I can't assign this to you, but you can see my dog-eared copy. It's an extraordinary book, well worth reading, but you make the case for the non-military instruments of power. Talk about how someone with your resume and experience came to feel this strongly about this topic.
Actually, one of the headlines when I was secretary, I gave a speech in which I called for more money for the State Department, and the press labeled it the man bites dog story. The Secretary of Defense had never asked for more money for the State Department. What I saw through the Cold War and in the post-Cold War period, and particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, is that with respect to the Cold War, by avoiding a military conflict, the outcome of the contest was actually resolved by non-military instruments of power. Economics, technology, diplomacy, development assistance, strategic communications, nationalism, intelligence, security assistance, and so on. And we, because of our strengths in each of these areas, it was kind of no contest. And as the relationship with China took a different turn particularly with the advent, I would say, of Xi Jinping, but actually before that. It became clear to me again that if we were to avoid if we could avoid a military confrontation with China, that the outcome of that competition will be resolved by the same non-military instruments of power. And in contrast to the Cold War, where we had all of those instruments and enormously well-financed, well-organized, very effective, in the wake of the Cold War, we had dismantled almost all of those capabilities. In 1998, the Congress dismantled, got rid of USIA, United States Information Agency, Strategic Communications. Now more recently, Voice of America has been shut down and so on. In 1999, Congress tried to get rid of the United States Agency for International Development. President Clinton wouldn't do that, but he did agree to move it under the State Department, and it really, as we probably will discuss, had a lot of problems subsequent to that. So a lot of these areas, and economics, for the first time, the United States faces an adversary that is technologically more advanced than we are in some areas and nipping at our heels in others. Economically is growing as powerful as we are, has significantly more manufacturing capability than we do, and is very active and aggressive in the global South. They're the biggest trading partner with more than 120 countries, and so on. So the point is, I wrote the book because, and the reason, frankly, that we started these forums here at William & Mary was the belief that we have to reform and change all of these non-military instruments. They've all outgrown their use-by date. They need to be changed. They need to be reformed, restructured, repurposed, and so on. There needs to be more creativity about engagement with the private sector, private foundations, and so on, with American business. So all of these capabilities are necessary, but all need great change. And figuring out what kind of change is necessary, and in the hope that it can gain bipartisan support in the Congress in particular, is the reason I wrote the book and the reason that we're doing these forums.
So much, sir. Moving from the strategic to operational, you mentioned changes are needed, new regulations. In the Man Bites Dog story you mentioned, it was my honor to write that story, and you were told, no, you can't give money to the State Department because of regulations, if I recall correctly. So what should be done at the regulatory level, at the government policy level, and working with private foundations that do such important work?
Well, one of the big problems that the government, there are a lot of problems, both in the structure and in the way the money gets handled. But the first deficiency in every one of these areas is there's no strategic plan. There's no operational plan, if you will, on how the different elements of the government are to sing from the same sheet of music. On strategic communications, we have 14 government departments and 48 agencies, each of which does international strategic communications. Not one of them talks to the other. There's no cohesion, there's no consolidated budget, there's no strategy. Same thing is true in development assistance, same thing is true in security assistance. The bureaucracies have become completely overloaded and fraught with all kinds of obstacles and difficulties in going forward. And I think Howard will tell you about some of those obstacles he ran into. So the first problem is a strategy. Second is whole of government. How do you get these different departments of government to pull in the same direction in these places? But the other thing is we have to have a better sense of priorities. Where does it matter for us to be involved? And is our engagement with these non-military instruments, is it to improve the lives of people in other countries, or is it to advantage our position vis-a-vis Russia and China? Those are both legitimate purposes, but they don't work in the same places in the same ways. So figuring out how that division of labor works, where do we need to focus, and what should we be able to do? And then And then we're not even hardly at the beginning of the process of how do we better integrate the private sector and foundations and so on, such as Howard's. I'll just give you one example where new institutions have been created in recent years, but they haven't been brought together. So President Trump got rid of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation in his first term and replaced it with something called the Development Finance Corporation, doubled the amount of capital available from $30 to $60 billion. That's actually a good thing. That's how you get the private sector investing in the global South. The Bush administration, second Bush administration, created the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which was a new way of dispensing foreign assistance, but it placed great emphasis on accountability, on local buy-in, on local engagement, and making them your partners, and then accountability. Those two need to be brought together, and figuring out how to bring those together and how to work them with the private sector and others is just one of the operational challenges that I think faces us today. A final point. There have been a lot of people complaining about the way some of these agencies went away, USAID in particular. But I would just make one point. When USAID was dismantled, not one single former Secretary of State, Republican or Democrat, protested. And the reason was all the problems all of those secretaries had with USAID, which is testimony to how much change and reform really is needed in that arena.
Thank you, sir. You cited the important work of Mr. Buffett's foundations on the ground, tactical level, touching people's lives individually. So, Mr. Buffett, for many people who don't know of the incredible work you've been doing, we saw photographs of it. Can you sketch some of the important initiatives in Ukraine that you funded since Putin's illegal invasion?
Well, typically we wouldn't work in Ukraine. We spent most of our time and effort and money in Africa and the southern hemisphere. And Ukraine was something, it's a country that I should have paid more attention to just to understand it better, but I didn't. And when the full-scale invasion occurred, I realized, my first thought was, I realized that having the agricultural output that Ukraine has, the impact that it's going to have in many of the countries where we already work. So that was the first thing I thought of. I've learned so much in the last almost 4 years that I almost feel like I missed the most important points back then. But we could be in Sudan, which is an incredible crisis. We are working in Congo. We've stayed out of Israel and Gaza because we don't understand it. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's only one thing happening today that I believe can lead us into World War III, and that's the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So looking at it from a food security and a conflict perspective, I knew we had to be there. And I didn't know what we were going to do the first trip I showed up, April of 2022. I was just trying to learn the lay of the ground and trying to understand what was happening. And one thing about war is you don't have the luxury of time. So, you know, we might go into a place like Congo, which is also very tough, very difficult place to work, but we have time. We're not pushed. We're not rushed. We're like, you know, there's bad things happening, but they've been happening. What role do we play? Where do we have impact? During war, you don't have that luxury. We had to learn very quickly who could we trust, who could we lean on, where could we spend our money, how do we do it effectively. So it was a very different scale up for us than what we had done. And until I was saying to the secretary earlier, you know, I hadn't really thought about, you know, you think about war as kinetic and non-kinetic and all that, and I don't know where we fit in that. I can't find a word for it, but I started thinking about it when I was coming here today, and I realized there's a huge psychological and morale standpoint to war. You have to keep your population somehow, number one, surviving, which in a lot of places in Ukraine is a challenge in itself. And you also have to keep them standing behind the government. you have to have them believe in what you're doing. You have to believe that the freedom and the democracy that they're fighting for, that your friends and your relatives are dying for, is worth doing. And so as I thought about some of what we do and how it fit in this conversation, I thought about it a little differently, realizing that a lot of what we're doing is trying to be sure that Ukraine, the civilian population of Ukraine can survive, and that they can understand and accept the pain and the suffering and the loss that they're going through so that they can continue on. This is an incredibly brutal war, and part of the strategy of Putin is to really try to get the civilian population to give up. And they're holding in there, but they're tired. I mean, it's 4 years almost. So our role developed as we got there. I mean, we didn't know exactly what we were going to do or how we were going to do it, but we found a way to fit into the different pieces and do it. But our money is really there for humanitarian purposes, but there's an unintended consequence in the sense that it supports a greater need, which is keeping the civilian population able to deal with the war and survive the war. And I didn't want to make, when I knew I was going to come here, I asked somebody on our staff to look up and this is not about telling other people how to spend their money. It's just telling you how, to Secretary Gates' point, to a certain degree, how we fail to respond and how we fail to adapt. We found 12 really large foundations that were giving money to Ukraine. They have a total of about $240 billion of assets. Over the period of time of this war, they've expended about $14 billion in funding. They've given $18 million to Ukraine. There's no effort in the foundation world to look at this conflict and realize the consequences that it's going to have to our country and our future generations.
Thank you. I would like to ask you, describe one program with a little more detail, the Superhumans program. We saw some of the victims of the tragedy with prosthetics and all that. We heard General Corelli describe it as one of the best programs he's ever witnessed, and he was so involved in tending to America's wounded from the war in Iraq. So talk about Superhumans, how it got started, and what its mission is.
Well, Superhumans is a perfect example of my belief that our money should be the risk capital in the world. We can take risk, we should take risk, and we should be completely willing to fail. The only way you get big ideas that work is to take risk. So Superhumans was kind of funny. I won't tell you the whole story, except that I had this relationship with the First Lady, and everyone knows I can't say no to her. So we were having this meeting, and she brought up Superhumans, and I mistook something, and I thought she was asking for money. I said, of course, we'll do $1 million. And Ann, the president of our foundation, walks out, and she says, she never even asked you for any money. And I'm like, well, okay. So now we started on the road of commitment to Superhumans. Well, to me, it became this opportunity to make a big bet. And if they failed, they failed. But if they succeeded, it was one of the most key things that this country needs now and they're going to need in the future. So we're now at just under $76 million that we've invested in Superhumans. But our first bet was to build a building of $16 million and then to fund some of the prosthetics. This is a perfect example. Superhumans is a perfect example. You have veterans, you have civilians. I've met 6-year-old kids, 7-year-old kids, 9-year-old kids that have all been blown up. They've lost their parents or lost their sisters. So it isn't just veterans, but you do have a lot of veterans. So you have thousands of people coming through. What's next? Okay. Well, what next can be? You can be debilitated and draw on resources and be a drain to society, or you can become productive and actually play an important role. So one of the most important things in Ukraine right now is their workforce. Now, most of these people aren't going back and fighting on the front line, although some of them are. But you have hundreds and hundreds of people that are working in drone factories, producing equipment to try to save their country, to defend their country. You have thousands of people that are providing military uniforms. You have, and I've met a lot of them, you have hundreds of people that are demining today. And those who are wearing prosthetics, most of them have lost their leg or their arm because of a landmine, although many have also been hit by other ordnance. But the point is that this is an investment that we can make that's 100% humanitarian, that is also at the same time providing one of the most key components that a country at war needs.
Thank you so much. As you can tell, I have 2 pages of questions here, but I'm cognizant that not only are we at William and Mary, but the Chancellor is sitting here, so I want to get to audience questions. But one last question for both of you. Secretary Gates, you mentioned the importance of public-private partnership. Mr. Buffett, in your photographs, I saw John Deere tractors, et cetera. What does, both of you, what does right look like in this sort of symbiotic and necessary public-private partnership to accomplish what you both have in mind?
Well, I think that it's easier to talk about than do because there hasn't been much done. And I've seen the potential. I just haven't seen it realized. So, for example, Howard and I have a mutual friend, Paul Brinkley. Paul Brinkley worked in my office when I was secretary, and Paul would lead groups of private sector business executives to Afghanistan and Iraq and try and help them figure out what business opportunities there were where they could partner with Iraqis and create businesses. And there were a lot of opportunities. And needless to say, what Paul did was controversial back in Washington because it was different and new, and Washington doesn't do either of those well. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. Another one that I was telling Howard about a little while ago that got under my skin was, particularly during the surge in Afghanistan, we really wanted a lot more civilian experts, and particularly in agriculture, and helping outside the cities. And we just didn't have enough human capital in the State Department and elsewhere to be able to surge those kinds of experts. Well, what I pointed out, having been the president of Texas A&M, a land grant, was that researchers and faculty from Texas A&M and other land grants all over America, and Nebraska and Kansas and everywhere, had worked in Afghanistan for 8 decades, developing crops, bringing the Green Revolution, doing all kinds of things, amazing things, and were accustomed to working in insecure situations and so on. And so I said to the president and to the Secretary of State, well, why don't you talk to Peter McPherson, the head of the National Land Grant University Association? Peter had also been the head of USAID in the Reagan administration. And I said, talk to Peter, and I'll bet you could sign up 500 experts on agriculture from land grant universities to go back to Afghanistan, because most of them have worked there before. They never made the call. So we, by failing to reach outside the government to potential partners, we have denied ourselves, in many respects, the kind of expertise and commitment and personal passion about these issues that is out there and just waiting. And it's in the private sector that Paul Brinkley was dealing with, in businesses. It's also in the universities and so on. And so those are just a couple of examples of where there's a lot of capability out there that really is sort of our secret sauce as America compared with the state-run activities of China in the global South. The only way we can begin to compete with China is to leverage not only the capabilities that we have inside the government, but the remarkable capabilities that we have outside the government. And I want to go back just for a second to the beginning of what Howard said on Ukraine in terms of the cost of war. And it's just a factoid worth considering. The war in Ukraine has now been going on longer than the United States was in World War II. Just think about that.
Powerful. Howard, to you, when Mr. Gates was Secretary of Defense, he talked about the need for a whole of government effort. I hear you both calling for a whole of society effort. So, since you've done so much work in this space, how do you make that work?
Well, to the question, I think I have a very specific example to provide on the question about on how you do a public-private partnership. That's kind of interesting. That also goes to one of the points that the Secretary made that about USAID. And so when we started, we were very involved in demining in Colombia. Another whole long story. And so we were familiar enough with it that if you combine that with the area of agricultural land, which is the size of Wyoming or something, that has to get surveyed for landmines. So all of that is out of production, and farmers are they're actually losing equipment and getting hurt. All those things are happening. But I got on the phone with Halo, who's become a really good partner of ours, a large NGO that does a lot of demining around the world. And I said, I'm going to ask about 30 questions, and some of them may be stupid questions, but then I have a couple big ones depending on the answers. So I went through these questions, and the idea was we had just purchased 8 demining machines for the special emergency services in Ukraine. It was going to take over a year, well over a year to get them. They're about $1.2, $1.3 million. I said, why couldn't you take bulldozers and tractors? And I'm already thinking that I'm running my tractors on guidance systems, and no one has autonomy in demining. So how could we, does that even make sense? Because you're the demining expert, I'm not. And we got done with the questions, and they said, well, we've tried this over and over, but it doesn't work. I said, why doesn't it work? He said, oh, the equipment will work. The concept works. In fact, it's great because when you get done demining, you have another machine that can go do the typical function that it's designed for. But USAID or Canada Aid or whoever it is, they will never give us money for a bulldozer that can demine because it's not a demining machine. So there's no innovation. There's no creativity. So we're doing this now. And we have 5 machines in the field running now. And as soon as Jared can get the last piece of software done, we're going to have a lot more. We have 5 D6 cats running. But we went to 3 companies. We went to John Deere, we went to Caterpillar, we went to a company called Kinsey Manufacturing in Iowa. And they have an amazing engineer and an amazing attitude. They are helping us do something in Ukraine that I hate the word game-changing, but it is. Our machines will do 2,700 acres. They'll roll over 2,700 acres in a month. An 8-person team will do 0.06 acres in a month, and a K9 team can do 1.6 acres in a month. And mainly it's because we're not inventing anything. We're just putting pieces together that already exist. But Caterpillar has put an amazing amount of work into what we would call a line-of-sight autonomous system, which will never be a commercial product. They're never going to make money on it. John Deere is doing the same thing. Kinsey has been incredible with us. So it's an example where business can support what our humanitarian efforts are. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. If you're innovative, if you're creative, if you can't get stuck in a paradigm where it's just the way everybody does things. But there's also businesses, U.S. businesses are really missing an opportunity. I mean, the only way I can send something to Ukraine today is DHL. And FedEx and UPS, I mean, I don't know what the problem is, but they don't even have to hardly put anything at risk. The capital they put at risk is minimal. It's vehicles. Most of those vehicles will be there tomorrow and the next day. They can hire Ukrainians to do it. So you have some businesses which could easily enter into the market in a very big way, and I don't know why they don't do it. And then you have a company like, I'm not promoting it. In fact, I want to say I have no stock in Dr. Pepper, so I'm not, but McDonald's just announced they're opening 14 new stores. So, some of it's a mindset, some of it's a willingness to take risk, but there's a lot of opportunity there.
Pelling, thank you so much. I would love to go to, I'm feeling all the IQ points from the students in the audience flowing this way. The president told me that the William and Mary rule is to take 2 or 3 questions at a time and then let our wonderful panelists decide which to answer and how. So you see a microphone here. Yeah, there's a hand here. As they say on Jeopardy, make sure your question's in the form of a question.
Hi, and thank you both so much for joining us today. Chancellor Gates, you talked a lot about operational levels, and then Mr. Buffett, you talked a lot about the promise of time. So when we're trying to make operational change, you have an inherent time problem with that. Is that a role well suited to the public-private partnerships to have these large-scale, admirable changes without limiting our strategic competition or capabilities? Excuse me.
Thanks so much. Question 2, I think, is in the middle of the second section.
Yes. My name is Danny Roque, and I'm a senior majoring in international relations. My team actually presented to Chancellor Gates back in October regarding an issue of command and control facing the Pacific Air Force, and I thank you very much on behalf of our team for your words and advice. But my question, it pertains to America's global strategy, or lack thereof. I ask, given your expertise in the Cold War and the different lines of alliances that helped shape its end, whether you believe the U.S. is currently underemphasizing or neglecting strategic regions and partners that may help the U.S. best counter China's rise and our ongoing race for AI dominance. Thank you.
Well, I would like to react to that because I think that, it's very easy to view different perspectives in different ways. A lot of that comes from your experience and your philosophy. But, for anything to work at the end of the day right now, Ukraine has to win this war. And so you can concern yourself with what the U.S. invests in at home in terms of building a stronger, military complex, or you can look at, where this is headed in terms of how China wants to dominate the United States economically, where Russia wants to dominate it militarily if they could, or the threat that North Korea or Iran has. So sometimes to figure out where you need to go, you have to look at the mistakes you've made. There's 3 really 40,000-foot level mistakes I think of, which get to the point of where do we eventually end up and what kind of condition is the United States in, both economically and strength and the ability to protect themselves and to keep all the things that everybody here sitting in this room enjoys and appreciates and wants to have and they value. So the first mistake is I had an A1 draft notice in 1973 when I was in high school, and they signed the armistice the same year, so I never served. But then I watched 5 other conflicts unfold in my life, and never was there a conflict that this country was involved in that the President of the United States did not go on national television and explain to the American people, this is why you need to care about it. This is why we need to be engaged. Here's the consequences if we don't. And so, up against the backdrop of an incredibly successful propaganda campaign that is pumped through a pipeline every day into this country by Russia, the American people have never been explained why Ukraine is important. It's a huge mistake that was made. The second is, you're all familiar with the Bucharest Agreement. You can argue whether it's assurances or guarantees or whatever you want to argue. But if I'm ever going to sign an agreement with the United States for security support, why would I ever believe them? I mean, at some point, we have to honor our agreements. We have to continue to believe in the principles and the values of why all of you are sitting here. And we failed to do that. And the last is, if you're not really paying attention to this, you might not think about it this way. But we have told, over the last 4 years, we have told every country in the world, if you want to stand up to the West, you need a nuclear weapon. Because Biden's administration started by giving Ukrainians enough to fight and die, but not enough to fight and win. And they did that out of fear. They did it out of fear of escalation. And I will tell you that where we are today in this war, the fact that we are trying to, well, some are still trying to de-escalate, is going to lead to escalation. This war is not going away. Russia's not stopping. And the way that he is playing this administration is amazing, because this is an old KGB agent who, how he ever got to where he is, I don't know. But he's been very clever. And we have a property developer negotiating with a war criminal to try him out with a peace agreement with a guy that doesn't want a peace agreement. This war is not going away. So we have to figure out, what is the commitment that Americans want to make to the future of our own country? And I tell you, one thing I've learned, I've been around the world, many places, most people don't care about anything until it affects them. Until it comes into their backyard or their home, they just don't care about it. But I'm telling you, you better care about this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
I think the first question had to do with speed. And I would go back to what Howard said about war and time. And in war, there is no time. So when my predecessor made the observation that you go to war with the army you have, my response to that when I became secretary was, that's true, but then you better get the army you need as fast as you can. And when our troops were being blown up in their up-armored Humvees in Iraq, it was clear that nothing we were doing was diminishing it. It was diminishing the threat. And my first visit with General Corelli to the burn unit at Fort Sam Houston, the burn unit was absolutely overflowing with kids who had been in up-armored Humvees and that basically turned into funeral pyres. And they had kids on gurneys in the halls and everything. And I read in the paper, I read it in the newspaper, that the Marines had a special South African designed vehicle in Anbar province that had a V-shaped hull, and in 300 attacks, not a single Marine had been killed. We looked into it. This was the early spring of 2007, and literally 6 weeks later, I decided we would buy these vehicles or similar vehicles. And there wasn't a single senior military person or civilian in the Department of Defense who supported that decision. What are we going to do with them when the war is over? What are we going to do? They're not part of our program of record. They're not this, they're not that. My attitude was, we've got kids dying out there. We've got kids losing arms and legs, and it's our job, it's our responsibility, it's our moral obligation to protect them. So I made the decision, and in this instance, I would say I had a lot of support on Capitol Hill from members of Congress. And to cut to the chase, when I ordered that program, first of all, we went with, I think, 5 different manufacturers. We didn't put it all on one company. And we began, that decision was made in the spring of 2007, and we started airlifting the first vehicles mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles to Iraq 5 months later. It's the first major procurement in the Department of Defense history to go from decision to full-scale American industrial production in less than a year since World War II. We ultimately fielded 27,000 of those vehicles at a cost of $40 billion, and they saved thousands of lives and limbs. But I go back to the original point. Speed was of the essence. And so I met with that team every 2 weeks. What are the bureaucratic obstacles? What's in the way? While you fool around with bureaucratics, kids are dying. And we got it done. So it can be done. We have the capacity to do it. If we focus, if we give it a proper attention and priority. So there's a lot of these other areas where speed is of the essence. And frankly, getting speed behind some of the things we're sending to Ukraine to help them is of the essence. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there that will say it can't be done. Well, it can be done. All it takes is determination and being willing to knock a few heads.
I remember we were on a flight out of Iraq seeing some of those armored vehicles, and you told us quite candidly that one thing you learned about the Defense Department is that everybody can say no, but only the secretary can say yes. I think we have time for, wish we could go all day. Let's curate 2 more questions, then we'll have to go. So here, and then here. Please.
Hi, thank you all so much for taking the time to come talk to us at William & Mary. And my question is, you mentioned the public-private partnership and the hesitancy to change, well, we've always done it this way, which is something I think most of us have encountered at some point in our careers. My question is, have you considered a public-private university partnership? Because I find that the younger generations are less burnt out, more willing to come up with new ideas, and work for less, particularly when they're in college. And a lot of great ideas and especially technological advances come from younger generations. And if that's something that you've thought about or would consider doing in the future is partnering with universities as well.
Thanks. And the last question, ma'am. So university public-private partnerships, and then Poland.
Well, it isn't just Poland. I think there's a few different dynamics going on in Europe. Poland is an absolute critical link to Ukraine. I mean, almost something like 85% of the military hardware that goes into Ukraine goes through Poland. What you're seeing, one dynamic which I think is very scary in Europe, is this far-right conservative movement that would move support away from Ukraine. That is difficult to do much about, but one thing we are doing is we're supporting in a very large way a number of different journalism projects so that the stories are coming out of Ukraine directly going to the Baltic states, to Poland primarily, and to make sure people understand what's happening and what the threat is and what Putin's capable of. So we are trying to address it that way. We were very involved to the degree that we can do it legally in the last election of Moldova. If you knew what Russia was doing in Moldova, you would be shocked. The amount of, I mean, they literally walk up to people and hand them thousands of dollars. I'm not making this up. And say, vote for this. When people need money, they do things. So the blatant effort by Russia to try to undermine democracy is incredibly strong. And there's an easy way to hit Russia on that. It's economically. And this is the other part of what I'm worried about in Europe. So you can argue different ways on whether or not the Russian assets that are frozen, particularly in Belgium, because they have a lot of them, $150 billion, should be used to support Ukraine. But if you look at history, and if you understand Putin, and honestly, if you understand old school Russian population, because I think there's a huge population today that's different, but they can't speak up. They're killed, they're put in jail, their families are threatened, whatever it is. So if you look at history and the facts of who you're dealing with, one of the big concerns is that Europe is scared. If they weren't scared, they would have taken $150 billion already of frozen Russian assets. And then their position is, well, that could cause a problem for us economically because it could affect how people see us. And the answer is so easy. The narrative is, if you're not a war criminal, we won't take your money. It's that simple. So I don't understand this hesitation of a commitment from Europe. Look, people can complain about what the United States has done, but this is in Europe's backyard. So I would say that everybody's getting tired. 4 years is a long time. It's almost 4 years. Everybody's getting tired. Polish people are getting tired. It's a burden on their country. You can't say it's not. But think if Russia moves past where what the gray zone is today, which is Kupiansk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinica, they move past that, you are going to see a huge movement. How many millions of people are going to go to Europe then? How is Poland going to deal with it then? How are the Baltic states and Germany and others going to deal with it then? This is a political, economic, and military disaster for Europe right now. And they've got to figure out how to do it. And so do we. I mean, we are failing at our job. We are no longer, when I grew up, and I don't want to be nostalgic, but when I grew up, we were the leader of the free world. And we made sacrifices to make sure that there were other countries in the world that were our allies, so that when we had to defend ourselves, we had the ability to defend ourselves. We allowed in 2022, this is when it started, we allowed Russia to develop a new and different type of relationship with Iran. We've now allowed it to do that with North Korea. And there's a different kind of love-hate relationship with China. But if you look at where we're headed, we're alienating our best security partners. We are alienating our biggest trade bloc. And we're allowing a consortium of enemies to get stronger. That is not the direction that we want to go. And I'm not saying this politically, I'm just saying it because the American people have to understand what the consequences are and what's at stake. And I think if everybody understood it, you might see Congress doing something different. But I also realize I'm too close to it. I've had friends that have died. I have friends that are fighting on the front line. But sometimes that also gives you a perspective that you need. Because that could be us at some point. And anybody who thinks that an ocean stops a ballistic missile, that makes me nervous.
So I'll make one point about Poland and then turn to the public-private university partnership. If just to add on to Howard's point about Poland, so if Putin is successful in Ukraine, there are a lot of us who believe the next target will be a place called the Suwalki Gap. Suwalki Gap is a piece of territory that connects Belarusia and Kaliningrad, that little corner of Russian territory north and east of Poland. And that is the strip of land that connects Poland and Lithuania. If the Russians were to take, it's only 60 miles long and it's very narrow. If the Russians were to take it, they would cut off all the Baltic states from NATO by ground. You could not get to any of the Baltic states with Western forces, and it also would put Poland at risk. So anybody who thinks if Putin is successful in Ukraine, he's stopping there, as Howard would say, think again. On the public-private partnership, actually, this is very old, and it really got its big start with the Vanderveer Commission back at the end of World War II, where they established the principle that the United States would contribute research funds to universities to do blue sky research, do basic research. And that has developed into the most extraordinary engine of innovation, creation, and invention in the history of the world. And it has led to our lead on AI, on a variety of other things over the decades of the government providing research funds to the universities, grants through the National Science Foundation, National Academy of Engineering, and so on. And then companies coming in and supporting that effort and also taking a stake in it. And so you look at a university like Stanford. Stanford gets richer and richer because they take a stake in the inventions that their faculty create. And so Google comes out of Stanford. Guess what is part of Stanford's investment portfolio? Google. And they've got a lot this is replicated all over the country. And it's especially true in the hard sciences, math, science, engineering, and chemistry, and so on. And one of my worries about many of the budget cuts that have been made in funding for the National Science Foundation and NIH and so on is that this engine of deep research that has basically funded America's technological lead in the world is being undermined. And if that paradigm gets broken, then we are in deep kimchi, because the problem is that the private sector no longer funds those kinds of blue sky research projects. So the Bell Labs that were big when I first came into government, or Xerox Labs, or a number of other companies that would use their own resources for basic research, that's basically all gone away. And so the universities are really where that innovation carries out and then is acquired by businesses that then create, or by investors who create significant businesses. I would say in terms of the ideas and so on that young people have and bring to the private sector or to government for that matter, and now my comments are mainly at the government. One of the things that I found most dismaying about DOGE earlier this year was that the first target in defense, in CIA, in state, and elsewhere were probationary employees. Those were the kids who had just graduated in the last year or two and had gone to work for these agencies to do public service, some in the hard sciences, some in the soft sciences, and some in languages and so on. But they're the ones that were bringing the new capabilities to government that they desperately need, data analytics and so on and so forth. The older people don't have those skills, and yet by getting rid of these probationary employees, they basically were killing the seeds of their future, in my view. So my hope is this is a transitory thing, that it passes in a year or so, and that pipeline reopens. My other concern is that it tells those who are seniors in college who were hoping to go, or who are finishing a master's, say, who were hoping to go into public service, makes them wonder whether that's the right career path for them. And again, my hope is this is transitory, but that pipeline is is how we get the ideas from the universities into the government. I'll tell you a quick story. I was giving a speech when I was secretary to the American Political Science Association, and one of the professors asked me, well, how do you read the research papers we do? And I said, no, we don't read those. We hardly have time to catch up with our inbox every day. We're not going to be reading a bunch of academic stuff. I'll tell you how we benefit from the research you do. We benefit from the research you do because we hire your students.
Well, to you both, thank you for a thoughtful and very thought-provoking discussion. Thanks for all you've done for our country, and thanks to William and Mary for hosting this terrific event. Get home safely, everybody.